Welcome back to Performance Process, everybody. Kaylee Fretz, Ronan McLaughlin. What are we talking about today?
Well, this episode, it's kind of the first in a series that we're going to do, delving into the sort of hows and the whys of how World Tour racing is getting faster and faster seemingly every single year.
Yeah, it's more of it's not a fact-finding mission. It's a question-finding mission, this particular episode. So our goal in speaking with our guest today, Alex Dowsett, recently retired pro, hour record holder, et cetera, et cetera. Our goal in chatting with Alex today is to uncover the questions that we should be asking over a bunch of future episodes. So the overarching question here is the World Tour today, this is a fact, the World Tour today is faster than it has ever been. Right? Average speeds are faster than they have ever been. Time trial speeds, classic speeds, Tour de France speeds, they're all faster than they've ever been. And of course, given the history of cycling, this leads to questions. So not only are we not going to sit here and talk about doping, we kind of can't. We can't answer a lot of those questions, particularly on this podcast. There is no question that racing speeds sort of increased throughout the sort of EPO and blood doping era of the 1990s and 2000s. They then took a sort of precipitous drop in 2010 with the advent of the biological passport. And then they started to slowly rise again to the point where we are right now. But we're not here to, sit here and wonder whether the pros of today are on worms or whatever it is that they might be trying to do. That is not the purpose of this podcast. The purpose of this podcast is actually that we have a bit of a hypothesis. We have some theories. We have some questions around all the multitude of things that can explain this that aren't doping, basically. Because the doping question is not an answerable question for the two of us right here. But the aero question and the nutrition question and the training question and the pacing question, these are questions that we can answer on this podcast. And hopefully in doing so, we help all of you out there. Because if we can uncover some of the things that are making World Tour riders faster than they've ever been, hopefully we can make you faster than you've ever been.
I think it's even bigger than that. I think it's like, regardless of whether doping is happening or not, there are other ways to explain how riders are going faster. I think, and we touched on it in the early part of the conversation with Alex, one of the things that frustrates me is that it's sort of every year we get to the tour and these things come up again, and it's always the only explanation thrown out there is that the riders must be doping because they're going faster. What I always think is, I don't know if they're doping or not. I think the peloton is much, much cleaner than it has ever been, and there are other explanations as to how they're going faster, and that's what I think this series of podcasts that we're going to bring now is going to try to break down. Hopefully, from each of those series, the listeners can take a lesson or take a takeaway from each episode, apply that to their own riding, and they can go faster themselves as a result. I think that sort of starts with the conversation that we had today with Alex, because you rattled off some of the list that we had here. He actually, straight out of the bat, give us an addition to the list that we hadn't even considered.
Let's go chat with Alex. The episode you're about to hear is actually for members only. So we've got about a third of it, half of it, something like that in this free channel. But if you want to get the whole thing, you have to head over to escapecollective.com/join. Once you do that, you'll get an email with instructions on how to get the members only podcast feed into your podcast app of choice. It's really easy. It's like one button click, takes like 90 seconds, and you don't have to do it again. You just do it once and it's in your phone forever, unless you cancel your membership, which we can see, and then we take it away. But just to warn you all, this is going to cut off.
Do it now so you don't get cut off halfway through.
Yeah, exactly. Just go over and
listen,
take care of this before we get started. Uninterrupted.
Alex Dowsett, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us. You actually need no introduction, so I'm not really going to waste much time in giving you an introduction. Anybody listening to this podcast knows who you are. They know what you've done. Before we delve into what we're here to talk about today, which is sort of trying to break down some of the hows and whys that World Tour racing has got faster over the past decade or so, and seemingly getting faster every year, I want to ask you two questions. I first of all want to ask you, would you rather sit on the wheel of a Dan Bigham-sized Miguel Indurain or a Miguel Indurain-sized Dan Bigham?
What a good question. Miguel Indurain-sized Dan Bigham, I think. Yeah.
It's a kind of question that came to us from one of our members wanting to know, is it more difficult to sit behind an aero optimized rider or a less aero optimized rider? Long story short, we've actually got some CFD work done on it. We'll have an actual answer to that question next week.
Okay, I've got a follow-up question. Which is Dan Bigham's head, like brain in race brain?
We're talking CFD here. It's not that advanced.
You can't ask that question because I've sat behind a Dan Bigham-sized Dan Bigham at the business end of a race, and occasionally spreadsheets go out the window, and he drops Miguel Indurain speed. That becomes quite unpleasant. So it's like, is the Dan Bigham head or is the Miguel Indurain head going to keep a lid on things when things get like spicy? And he feels good.
I don't know. We'll speak to the CFD guy. The other question is, I just want to know, are you nervous ahead of the CTT AGM this weekend because the big question around banning fairings?
No, I'm not nervous because I didn't have any fairings. I was well hydrated for 10-mile time trials.
I do hope you can maintain your hydration levels going into next season. That is critically important. Anyway, getting into this week's show, I think you and I I think all three of us actually on a very same page, where every year the Tour de France rolls around, somebody happens to do some climb somewhat faster than somebody else did 20 years ago, and the Twitterati, I'm not sure what they're called now on X, but the Twitterati sort of jump to the conclusion that because the times are better nowadays and the methods of achieving those times were quite scrupulous 20 years ago, that the riders in today's peloton must be up to no good. And when I say up to no good, we all know we're talking about doping. What annoys me about those particular conclusions are that you very rarely hear any mention of even just the tactics involved in that stage and how the climb is raced and the weather conditions and how that varies. And not only do you not hear that mentioned, but you'll often hear, or you'll often see in the same thread, someone will say, well, they've beat Pantani's climb or whoever's time, Armstrong's time, whoever's time on this climb. They must be doing something. And then in the very next thread will say, and they would have beat it on this climb had they not slowed down because there was tactics involved and stuff. And it's like this confirmation bias creeping in all over the place. What you also never hear mentioned is just how advanced all manner of tech and understanding and training and everything that goes into making riders faster these days. We never really hear that fully broken down. And that's kind of what we wanted to get into with this podcast, first of all, is to try and tease out what are the differences that are making riders faster these days. And that's why we thought we'd get you onto the show, is because you've been a pro rider for a long time, highly successful, Grand Tour stage ones, retired at the end of last season. So you've sort of seen that progression unfold. And well, you and I were talking about how this conversation might go, and you said one of the things to look at is how incremental the progress has been. And then we were sort of saying, well, is there a way you could track that? And I think you did come up with a way, or you have a way.
I effectively did it with the Malden 10. I just didn't realize I was doing that at the time. Just my secondary life goal to being a good pro rider was just simply going quicker around my Malden 10 course. And I didn't realize whilst I was doing it just how important that was to what it did to my pro time trialing. I had the same every week, the same course, same start finish, differing conditions, but like certainly in the second half, always trackable conditions. So you could air pressure and wind direction. But I'd say as just about as controllable as you can get with something like that. And as soon I had a power meter from start to finish. It was always fairly accurate, with the exception of 1 or 2 years, fairly accurate power meters. But to be honest, the power became somewhat irrelevant because it was always within the same window, somewhere between like 400 and 435 watts around this course average would be my kind of window. of power. And I actually found that sort of whether it was 410 or 430 didn't make as much difference to the time as I would have thought. It was more, the bigger differences was equipment getting faster, pacing was massive. And not much positional stuff either, because I didn't really change my position until 2020. Yeah, so that was all around those kind of bits. And that was just trying to go faster, which I think for a lot of pro teams was, as power meters were introduced, I think speed was ignored for a while. And I think certainly in the last 5 years, perhaps last 5 or 6, 7 years, speed has been acknowledged a bit more again. It's quite an important metric.
Well, I guess the question, first of all, is did you get faster in that time, or with your watts staying the same?
Yeah.
And I think we know the answer.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I think 2012, I was trying to go under 20 minutes. And then by the end of, and then I basically found 1 minute and 10 seconds in a decade. Yeah, which is about right. Yeah, the goal at the end became about going under 19 minutes for it. And I scraped that in 2021. I went under 19 for the first time, and I was like, "Look, job done. More is not achievable in my window of talent." And because if it's taken me a decade to find a minute, it's going to take me 2 decades to find another minute. It was the Molden 10 was also my the Girona guys, when they go and set times up Roca Corba to see how fit they were. The Molden 10 was mine. So I mean, in that middle kind of 2015 to 2021, it was like if I was doing a low 19, I was on the money for being competitive at World Tour level. If it was high 19s, I was off the pace. It was as close as that. And then 2012, or 2011, when I was doing 20s round there, I won time trial stage of the Tour of Britain with some pretty fierce opposition. It's all moving in line. I'd say I was going faster. You see it. I was going slower around the Molden 10 then, and winning. Won my Giro stage win and my Molden 10 TT. Decade later, I'm not winning time trials, but I'm doing long 18s around the Molden 10. So my progression rate has not been as steep as the peloton's progression rate, and so sort of fallen behind just slightly. I've increased by 6%, but I think the peloton's probably increased by 8.
Do you think you were, if we look at time trials specifically, and I might say one of the fierce competition that you had in that Tour of Britain time trial stage was yours truly here. Yeah. Well, I wasn't on a great day that day, so we'll let you have that one. But what I was going to ask was, do you, at that time, you were known as a time trialist. We all knew you as a time trialist. So were you sort of ahead of the game and sort of benefiting from everything that we're about to talk, some of the things we're about to talk about in a second already, and actually the riders who are winning time trials nowadays have sort of somewhat come from behind and leapfrogged and benefit even more from?
I think I was ahead of the game. I just didn't realize I was. I love time trialing. I love going back to the Molden 10, and I love the process of just trying to go faster, trying to hit the next little target, trying to go under, trying to PB, go under 1945, go under 1930, go under 1915, those kind of things. And that was, that was like going to a wind tunnel. I wasn't really focusing on aerodynamics. It was more around, a bit more around equipment and pacing strategies. I think for me was the biggest gain, the confidence to back off in a time trial. I told this story once. I had a wonderful interaction with a very young Mark Soler in Zurich Rundfahrt in 2015. I'd won the time trial, and afterwards he was in Movistar, and he came up and he was like, "Alex, can I ask you about your time trial?" And I said, yeah. He said, he's Spanish. First question is, how heavy are you? And I was like, well, I've just done the hour record, so I'm pushing 79 kilos at the moment. And he's like, well, I'm 70. And I said, cool. And he said, well, how much power did you do? And I said, I averaged 395 watts. And he was a 27K TT, which I was pretty disappointed with. And he was like, and you just saw his eyebrows furrow, and he's like, I averaged 400. So in his head, the watts doesn't make sense, and the watts per kilo makes even less sense, which is sort of what the Spanish really like to operate in. He says, well, you must be more aerodynamic than me. I went, well, I'm not 2.25 minutes more aerodynamic, mate. That's, we're on the same equipment here, the same team, same equipment. Yeah, you can tell it really through. I said, well, I like that you're interested. I like that you want to improve. It's more than 99% of pro cyclists will do for their own TT. And so let me ask you about two parts of the course. The first one's the start, because after 1 kilometer, I was already 10 seconds ahead of you. 10 seconds in 1 kilometer. I said, what did you do? You came off the start ramp. What, you sprinted, you sat down, clicked up a few gears, sprinted again, sat down. I was like, what, you're doing 800 watts? It's like, yeah. I said, okay. I rolled off the start ramp, sat down, got in the tuck and didn't go over 500. So I did less power, 10 seconds ahead. And then the next section, which is probably the most important one, we were up on like a plane, and it was a bit of a unique one where you descend into a climb and then you're back up on top again. So on the downhill, how much power were you doing? He's like 400 watts. Like, okay. And how fast were you going? He was like, about 60 kilometers an hour. Like, right. I said, on the uphill, how much power were you doing? He's like 400 watts. I said, okay, let me tell you what I was doing. So we got to the top. I surged in to really get some speed. I then sat on the top tube, which was allowed then, and I was doing 0 watts, and I was doing 70 kilometers an hour. So I was doing 400 watts less than you were, and I was going 10 kilometers an hour faster. So then we hit the climb. I then do 500 watts because I can, because I've had this big old rest. So if we're going to work in watts per kilo, I'm beating you on outright power. I'm beating you on watts per kilo. And I started the climb 10 seconds faster than you, which means I finished. My rate of deceleration is so much less than yours already from a higher speed. So I crest the climb faster than you. I then, to accelerate back up to like 50, 55 kilometers an hour, I've got less. I'm doing that from 30. You're doing that from 20, 25. Like the time you lost there is biblical. And I still did less watts per kilo than you did. And he was like, yeah, he got it. I think that's for me, the biggest thing has been, pacing strategies and time trials, just having the confidence to back off. And that's where I think power meters have slowed a lot of people down, because everyone wants to get back to the bus, back to the village hole and go, I averaged a huge amount of power. But I reckon the real bragging right is to come back and go, I only averaged this, and look how well I did.
Well, we'll add that to the list then. Number 1, pacing strategies. I don't think it was top of our list when we sat down to write the list that we came up with. So definitely an interesting one. I mean, makes total sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's that you see so often as well. Just in sort of areas, so many people focus on like buying the right tire, the right front end, dropping $1,000 on a set of handlebars, but the position hasn't been looked at. And I think pacing strategy should come into the same. A lot of marginal gains, but you've got 2 maximal gains, I believe, in pacing and positional.
I mean, bringing that back to road racing, then, how much do you think that creeps into? Obviously makes a huge difference in time trialing. And if we look at today's World Tour teams, they have teams of engineers and data analysts and all sorts behind the scenes. Is that the kind of stuff that they're working on and working out, the best way to break down a stage, tackle it bit by bit, or is that getting a bit too advanced?
I'd like to think the top teams have. I think there's a big misconception that pro teams are Formula One level sort of analytics, and I think a couple of teams are there, or sort of scraping, getting close to. But I think a lot of teams, it's very rider. It's very motivations have to come from the riders to go faster. It's the amount of times turn up to a race with a set of ceramic bearings and have to politely ask the mechanic with a set of beers, would you mind putting these on? And then I'm like, well, we're trying to make bike faster. Bike faster means more chances of winning. Yeah, it shouldn't be the fight. Sometimes it is. Yeah, in terms of climbing, I wasn't a good climber, so I was just like.
That's maybe something to touch on there, is like that reluctantness from teams to fully invest in upgrades such as ceramic bearings, or there's a whole list we could go through there. But has that changed in your time? I can picture when you joined the pro ranks. Had you joined any other team other than Sky, that might have been a very, very difficult ask. But surely by the time you were leaving the ranks last year, those sorts of things were much easier conversation. You didn't need a 6-pack of beers to get that done last year, did you?
Sometimes still, yeah. Yeah, sometimes. It depends what the team believed in. I think Israel, for the first couple of years I was there, was more about physiology than technology. Did not acknowledge how much the equipment could be slowing us down. And they do their own testing. It'd be quite rudimentary. For sure, later on, people acknowledge riders, and I think the good thing is the riders talk. Like riders all have friends within the peloton, so if you're really good friends with someone, you'd start asking numbers. You'd be like, "This is what I'm doing. This is what this bike just a little bit faster than what I was using last year. Like I can feel it. Like riders' intuition is really important as well. I think depending on the rider, the one I struggled with because I did a lot of that stuff at Israel was Michael Woods. So Michael Woods in a road stage, let's say that Tour de France stage he won last year. I struggled with what wheels do you put on Michael Woods's bike for that stage? Because it's a long stage. So there's an energy saving thing. Energy saving, you put the 60 mil wheels on, most aerodynamic for the rolling, the flat. But the crunch point where Michael Woods has to win a race, you put the wheels that he can accelerate best on, which is focused really solely on a climb that steep, focus solely on weight. That's a very difficult one. And so to answer your question, I think teams perhaps look at that and go, it's a very difficult question. And if we really do our homework, that is a very expensive question to answer. It's not a case of just raw aerodynamics. Ultimately, he's in the peloton for most of the day as well. So what's a wheel doing in the peloton compared to what's a 30 mil or a 20 mil wheel doing in the peloton versus a 60 mil wheel? It then becomes a much more difficult question. So I think teams then go at the start of the day, Michael, what wheels do you want to use today? That's the extent of it. You sort of focus, I guess and after that you focus on the things that you can focus on. It's like, let's make something really light because like aerodynamics is a dark art. It costs, wind tunnel time costs a lot of money. So making something light is cheaper. Coaching is probably cheaper. Teams will focus on what they can achieve in line with probably their budget and also sponsor constraints. Remember when I went to from Sky to Movistar, I was a big fan of isometric chain rings at Sky. I think I'd found the sweet spot of training on round rings and racing on isometric. Every year at Movistar, I'd be like, can I have isometric chain rings? And they're like, no. About the third year, Xavier said to me, he said, Alex, why do you want these isometric chain rings so much? He just went here. Who is any good that is using isometric chain rings? And that was the year before Nairo finished second to Chris Froome in the Tour de France, so which hurt. And I just went, Froome. And Xavier was like, yeah, okay, fair enough. But yeah,
who else?
The answer is still no, because Campag will never allow it. And I think that's the other thing is how much a team slaves to their sponsors. The perfect team is a team with a sponsorship like Jumbo have, like Ineos have, where it's not product based, it's results based, and Ineos, Jim Ratcliffe probably doesn't. Also, I know they've got Pinarello's sponsorship, but I would imagine Jim Ratcliffe would not care if they are on bikes from Tesco's, if those are the fastest bikes.
Okay, Ronan here, just interrupting this podcast because if you're hearing this, it's probably because you are not an Escape Collective member and Performance Process is a members only podcast. Now, don't worry, as a non-member, you can enjoy part of this podcast that you've just heard. You can also enjoy limited access to our escapecollective.com written content. You don't get to enjoy our Discord channel at all, and it's got Performance Process and Aero and Time Trial and performance dedicated channels where you can speak directly to myself, to Kaylee, to many of our guests actually are on the Discord channel there also. And you also don't get to comment on the website post here. So if you'd like to fix all that, and most importantly, if you would like to stop hearing me interrupting my own podcast, then just head over to escapecollective.com/join. Sign up there. It's a one-time process then to get this full episode delivered to your podcast app of choice, excluding Spotify, every time we put out a new episode. And best of all, you won't have to listen to me make this message again.